Hello, welcome everyone to Keen On. You are not hallucinating. I'm David Masciotra, guest host today. You may recognize me, to use the famous phrase of Troy McClure, from previous episodes on my book, Exerbia Now, The Battleground of American Democracy, and other topics I've addressed in various essays. Today, it's my pleasure to occupy Andrew's seat and act as his interlocutor, his interrogator, perhaps inquisitor, we shall see, uh, about the direction of his program and about his overall assessment of the ever changing American scene. So, Andrew, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Let's start with your name change. When I first was a guest on the program, it was Keen On. And as of recently, you've taken to calling it Keen on America. Does that signify a narrower focus? And if so, why?
Well, thank you, David. I've created a lower third for myself. I'm describing myself as guest, which is probably accurate. It's a good question. The show Keen On as a podcast, it began in 2010. I was the first video show on TechCrunch, and it focused exclusively on tech. And during the 2010s, the show, it wasn't a daily show, it was often a weekly show, but it focused on technology. And then during the pandemic, we recalibrated or redirected the show. We called it Keen On, but we focused increasingly on not just technology, but politics and history and economics. And it became a bit of a book show. I did a deal with LitHub, and the show was distributed on that. So during COVID, the show became much more frequent and then turned into a daily show. But over the last couple of years, it's become increasingly clear to me, I don't think this is a particularly original or profound observation, that I've happened to find myself in the America of the 2020s, in the cockpit, shall we say, of world history. And rather than talking endlessly about social media or a new book of that kind or another, I really wanted to focus the show on this remarkable story of America in the 2020s, what's happened to it, not just Trump, of course. Trump is both, I think, a cause and a symptom of things that are changing. So I have, over the last few months, changed, well, it's not really changed the title of the show. I've added an America. So rather than calling it the Keen On podcast, we're calling it Keen On America. And it doesn't mean that every show is about America, but I'm trying to focus on American themes, whether it's American culture, American literature, American politics, American history, American geography, the American environment, because I feel that it would be unwise to miss this opportunity with this front seat. And I'm not alone in having that front seat on American history, particularly given that I wasn't born in this country and I bring my own story, my own narrative as an immigrant.
That's a good topic to which we'll return in a moment, but the Trump administration and its devotees promise that he's ushering in a new golden age of America. Jonathan V. Last, writer and editor at The Bulwark, recently wrote a very smart essay declaring the American age over. So between those two poles of disagreement, where do you find yourself?
It's a good question. And actually, it's ironic that you bring up Jonathan Last, because he published, I can't remember the name of the periodical. It was an American Catholic publication of one kind or another, ironically. And back in, I think it must have been 2005 or early 2006, he published the first piece I wrote as a critique of Web 2.0. So I haven't talked to Jonathan for many years, but he has a storied history in my own story anyway, and he gave me my first opportunity to write about Web 2.0, this critique from within Silicon Valley of the Web 2.0 revolution, which of course led to my book Cult of the Amateur, which came out in 2007.
And which we discussed in a recent episode.
Right. So your question's, as always, David, a good one. I don't believe the American age is over, but what I would say is that the American 20th century age is over. I mean, obviously the 20th century is over, that goes without saying. But the American dream of the 20th century, the American political and economic system, is clearly in crisis, in a kind of decline, but also radically changing. And I think that the 21st century, I think it's oversimplistic and deterministic to assume that the mantle of world leader will be seized by the Chinese or some other power, and America will lose its power and become a middle-ranked nation like the United Kingdom or France or even Japan. But I do think things are changing. And one of the things that particularly interests me about the America of the 2020s is that a lot of the issues that the country is addressing, trying to resolve, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, are consequences of the breakdown of its 20th century system, both in a domestic and an international sense. So what particularly interests me about the America of the 2020s, to borrow a perhaps overused term from Silicon Valley, I think America is reinventing, consciously or otherwise, its operating system. It was clear what that operating system was in the 20th century. It's not clear what it is in the 21st century. And that's one of the reasons why I changed the name of the show and really focusing on America. I'm also in the process of putting a book together about this, which I'll talk about in more detail in future episodes. But for me, this is a particularly interesting story.
What fascinates me about your perspective on the reinvention, as you call it, is your books, of which I've read nearly all of them, strike a, if not pessimistic, at least highly critical tone about what Web 2.0, as you just called it, would do to politics, to culture, social relations, economics. And yet now you seem almost optimistic, almost hopeful, despite the nightmare in the headlines that we see every day. So am I wrong in seeing that transformation, or am I correct? Could you explain?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, it might, I guess, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway. I mean, I'm most comfortable when I'm going against the current. It doesn't mean one should always go against the current. Sometimes the current is right. But it was clear to me in the mid 2000s or to the noughts that the irrational exuberance about Web 2.0 and social media and the internet was wrong. And it was undermining, in some ways, American democracy, American business, the American middle class. But I think the pendulum has overswung the other way. And now the pessimism is a little, firstly, it's depressing, and I think it's wrong. I think that what we're seeing, and Gramsci wrote about this, of course, is that Machiavelli wrote about it as well. The Italians are very good in terms of their philosophizing of history. In that we're in an interregnum historically, and the good seems particularly good or promising, and the bad seems particularly bad. Gramsci talked about these interregnums as periods for monsters, which is true, of course. And I don't want to make this just about Trump. Trump is a classic monstrous manifestation in a period of historical uncertainty. in this period between systems, between operating systems. But I also think it's just as these periods are ones in which monsters prosper, I also think that angels prosper here too. And there are many people in America trying to figure this thing out, trying to reinvent the country in a way that will make it prosper in the 21st century. And that's one of the things that particularly interests me. And rather than just thinking politics and thinking about the Democratic Party, this governor, that governor, Gavin Newsom, AOC, I think one needs to think a little more ambitiously. And in terms of your question, I have begun to, I think, rethink technology. I mean, back in 2005, the threat of authoritarianism didn't exist. When we were still at Fukuyama's end of history. It was in the early period of the Putin age. No one ever imagined that Trump would conceivably run for president, let alone become president. Even Trump back then wasn't the Trump of now. So the great threat seemed to me to become big tech companies like Google. But 20 years later, things have dramatically changed, and the threat of companies like Google or Amazon seems considerably less concerning than the threat of Trump to American democracy and American freedom. I mean, that doesn't mean that some tech companies are bad. I mean, I've done lots of shows, for example, about Facebook. We just did a show about the new history of Facebook by a Facebook insider called Careless People. And there is a Gatsby-like quality to Facebook. I'm certainly not going to defend Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg, but I think in the broader scope of things, we've seen dramatic shifts in the last 20 years, and I think the focus, for example, on smartphones and social media by people like Jonathan Haidt. It is a kind of manifestation of the hysteria currently in America, the hysteria between generations and the lack of trust of an increasingly gerontocratic society in young Americans.
Well, you're certainly correct to observe that we live in hysterical times. Is it part of the hysteria then to, in contradiction to the analysis you just offered, see forming around Trump something of a tech oligarchy, where you have these CEOs seated at the inauguration, very much responsible for his election. Their financial contributions alone were pretty dramatic. And then also knowing that people like Peter Thiel, who mentors J.D. Vance, have turned against the very concept of democracy. Can you, as someone who's studied and written quite powerfully about tech, can we so neatly decouple these companies with the Trump authoritarian threat, or are they rather linked?
It's another good question, David. I mean, we are talking on the 10th of April. I think we're going to put this interview up in a few days. So who knows what's going to happen over the next few days in terms of Trump and Musk and tariffs and all the rest of it. But I don't buy the idea of the tech oligarchy somehow controlling Trump. We're already seeing a division between Musk and Trump over tariffs, certainly between Musk and Navarro. We haven't heard a lot from people like Mark Andreessen over the last few weeks. My guess, I mean, I'm not on friendly terms with Andreessen. My guess is they're becoming increasingly ambivalent and nervous, particularly in economic terms. Thiel is an exception. He's always been an exception. He's a tech intellectual. And he has very strong conservative views. Some people might say more than conservative, neo-authoritarian. Some people have even accused him of being a fascist. I'm not sure if that's fair, but certainly certainly he is a conservative figure, but I'm not sure how many other Peter Thiels there are. And of course, he took the risk in supporting Trump 1.0, where most of Silicon Valley wasn't willing to do that. So he's a political gambler too. I think there are divisions within Silicon Valley over all this stuff. We talked about Musk, and we can see it with venture capitalists. I think the vast majority of venture capitalists are still more sympathetic to the Democrats. And I think one of the reasons why Silicon Valley became keen, for a while at least, to borrow a term, on Trump was the poor performance of the Biden administration. So I don't see Trump or Trumpism as being some sort of Silicon Valley style supported autocracy. We're seeing all sorts of divisions. Another interesting division within Silicon Valley, which is, I don't think ideological, it's personal, is between Elon Musk and Sam Altman, who were the co-founders of OpenAI. Then Musk went off in a huff, and now they're the two of the most dominant figures in the AI revolution. But they loathe one another, and Musk's done everything he can to separate Altman and OpenAI from Trump. I don't think he's been particularly successful. So I don't see Silicon Valley as a monolith, and I certainly don't see tech as being unambiguously sympathetic to Trumpism and authoritarianism.
Elon Musk is an immigrant. You're an immigrant. A moment ago, you used the word hysteria. I would argue that one of the worst hysterias right now in the United States surrounds immigrants and the supposed threat that immigrants present to the American way of life. Of course, there's a long tradition of that in the United States, going all the way back to the Know Nothing Party, the nativists of the 19th century. What attracted you to the United States of America in the first place, and why does it continue to fascinate you as an intellectual, as a member of the media? What do you see that's perhaps special about this country, or at least worthy of study, worthy of discussion?
I can't keep on complimenting you, David. So I'm not going to keep on saying that was a good question, but you know what I think. It's a great question, and all immigrants, I think, to America have strong feelings on this. My sense is that people often come to this country, maybe less economic migrants from poorer backgrounds, but people like myself who came to graduate school and could make their career either in the United States or back where they were from. I was from the United Kingdom. They usually come and they're ambivalent. There's stuff about America they don't like. It's culture, it's food, the people, blah, blah, blah. That goes without saying. But if you stay in this country for one reason or other, after a few years, I think it's a very hard country to leave, partially because of its size and its importance. Just stuff happens here. When I go back to the United Kingdom, I love going back to London. It's still my emotional home. It's a great city, perhaps greater in some ways than New York, certainly greater than any other American city. But it always, or Britain at least, seems very small, very provincial. So there's that. The fact that stuff happens in America, which is what I explained about Keen on America, is I think that the history of the 21st century is being written in the 2020s in America, not just in America, obviously in Beijing and elsewhere. But I think America matters much more than any other country, which makes it a really interesting place to live. The other reason, I think, and I touched on this earlier in terms of the invention and reinvention of my show, it went from a tech show to a book show, now to a show about America, is I get bored quite easily. I went to American graduate school, but I got bored with that. It got bored with me as well. I'm not a specialist. And I like starting all over again. So I came as a graduate student. I was a professor. I was a music journalist. I was a startup entrepreneur. Then I became a critic of startups. Then I became a podcaster and a broadcaster and many other things, an investor. So for me, what I like about America is the fact that you can always reinvent yourself. That it's a place, and maybe this is critical in a sense, but it's a place without memory. You can't continually reinvent yourself in the United Kingdom. I think it's why my generation of English polemicists of one kind and another, they came to America to reinvent themselves. Think of somebody like Andrew Sullivan, or the kind of father of all of us, symbolically at least, Christopher Hitchens. Hitchens couldn't have done what he did, reinvent his own politics, if he'd have stayed in the United Kingdom. He couldn't have become a conservative in the United Kingdom, or a patriot, or a nationalist. So what I really love about America is the freedom to invent and reinvent oneself. And of course, it's in contradiction to that famous quote from Fitzgerald. I mean, Fitzgerald for me is I'm not an expert on American literature, but is a wonderful writer. And I think I've said this before on the show. The Gatsby is the most perfect novel that I can think of. But Fitzgerald said there are no second chances in American life, and he couldn't have been more wrong. It's a culture, a society of second chances. That doesn't mean that everyone, without the privilege of someone like myself, have those second chances. But I also think that's what attracts people. That's why people are willing to risk their lives coming today from Honduras or El Salvador or Mexico or Venezuela or Peru or Chile or parts of East Asia. They're willing to risk their life because they want to reinvent themselves.
Walt Whitman wrote in the preface to the first edition of Leaves of Grass that America is a new nation in need of new poets and new prophets. Who are the poets and prophets of America today, in your view?
That's that's a hard question, not a good question.
Well, I was tired of you complimenting me, so I wanted to insult.
So it was you've caught me with my pants down, metaphorically at least, David. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, who do you think are? I mean, are we talking about what, futurists? I mean, there are a lot of smart people in America, right?
Right.
And no one comes to mind as a prophet. I mean, there are people who think they're prophets. I mean, think of Trump, of course, who I think are false prophets, to put it mildly. There is, of course, a strong religious tradition also in the United States, which interests me. I'm not a religious person myself, but I had Jonathan Rauch on the show recently. Like you, he's an old friend of the show, and he's interviewed me as well as me interviewing him. His last book was, even though he prides himself on being a gay atheist Jew, it's a book which gives religion the benefit of the doubt, particularly in the context of the Church of Latter-day Saints, formerly known as Mormons, which he sees as a positive vehicle for religious thinking, in contrast, I think, to some of the other evangelical groups. And I also think in the context, I'm sort of dodging your question a little bit, but in the context of the first question on America, what attracts me, whilst I'm not a critic of the New Deal, and I think there is a need for a state, certainly a safety net. The other thing about America that I like, and which is bound up with the possibility of invention and reinvention, is its focus on self-discipline. The Protestant ethic, which of course Weber wrote about in the beginning of the 20th century. It's a very famous book, the Protestant Ethic and the Origins of Capitalism. Most people don't know that Weber actually visited America for a few months before writing that book, immediately before. So I'm particularly interested and I guess attracted to the promise of the Protestant ethic, which I think is in some ways the heart of the American dream. Progressives now mix up the American dream with the idealized version of political systems like Denmark or Sweden or Finland or Germany, social democracies. But I think the American dream is more bound up in self-creation and self-discipline. It's more closely associated with someone like Andrew Carnegie.
Is self-discipline and the personal responsibility necessary for its success fading in American life? It seems like, you're going to accuse me of sounding conservative again, but it seems like one of the strange conditions that's contrary to the America you're rightfully praising is kind of an erasure of personal responsibility. People enjoy scapegoating and excuse making now on both the right and left. It doesn't get as much attention on the right because it's off brand, but the Trump movement, to a very large degree, is just blaming other people for their own problems, whether they're immigrants or the so-called elite, which includes everyone from community college adjuncts to Academy Award winners. What's happened to that spirit of America? Do you still see it, or is it gone? Or is it not gone, but fading away?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a conservative either, because I think as we get older, we have a tendency to be nostalgic about the past, particularly our youth, and suggesting that things used to be better. I think that's certainly one critique of my work on technology, which makes some sense. What I think is interesting about America in terms of the Protestant ethic and self-control is what's seen as the biggest threats, both on the left and the right, to freedom in America are associated with one kind of addiction or another. We mentioned the Jonathan Haidt school of technological addiction, suggesting that kids shouldn't be allowed to have smartphones. Of course, we have the Trumpian fear of addiction, which vindicates at least invading or trying to invade Mexico and putting pressure on countries like El Salvador to fight drug addiction. So I'm particularly intrigued by this very uneasy relationship between, shall we say, the American Protestant ethic and American tendency towards addiction. Drugs, of course, technology, wealth, self-fame. And I think that that's one of the most interesting but also problematic contradictions at the heart of American life. And you could argue that sometimes the most successful people in America, the people who seem to manifest that self-discipline, are themselves addicted to one thing or another. I mean, Trump, for example, is famously, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, presumably he doesn't take drugs, but he's addicted to himself. He's a classic kind of narcissist. It's clear that someone like Musk, who's certainly the most successful businessman in America these days, the richest man in the world, he is also addicted to one kind of narcotic, a more traditional narcotic or another. So I'm particularly interested in that. I'm not sure if I've answered your question. So you remember at the beginning of Amusing Ourselves to Death, Neil Postman in 1984, it's the perfect beginning, the best one-page or two-page beginning to a nonfiction book I've ever read. He said, and he was writing in 1984, we got it wrong. We expected 1984 to be obviously Orwellian, that 1984 would result in Orwell. But actually, when he was writing in 1984, Huxley's Brave New World is much more relevant. And I think that's even more true today. Huxley's Brave New World, with its focus on addiction, is a much more pertinent, I think, book, much more relevant in a profound way than I think even 1984. I just don't buy, for example, the idea that Trump is Big Brother. He might want to be Big Brother, but he's not a very efficient one. And if you remember in Brave New World, there's Soma and there's addiction.
Yeah.
We're already seeing that now with weight loss pills, obviously the opioid addiction, technology addiction. So for me, even though Huxley wrote it in England, then later he came to live in the United States, Brave New World is the most American of books.
Well, it's interesting you should bring up Postman, because I've done some work on David Foster Wallace. I had a lengthy essay on his work, Run in Liberties.
And when I get you back on the show, we'll swap roles again. You'll be a real guest rather than a guest.
That sounds great. I would look forward to it. And Wallace was very much influenced by Postman, and his magnum opus, Infinite Jest, deals with addiction in various forms. But the one on which he focuses most is addiction to entertainment. And he believed that would be our undoing. So I wonder how, and you could see that thread. I mean, nothing explains everything, but you could see that thread run through Trump again. You could see it run through much of our political dysfunction and cultural pathologies. This need to make everything entertaining, or if something is entertaining, then it provides cover for its failures in other areas. So as someone who's joined this, not recently, but as is part of this podcast world, how do you see media moving into the future of America? The gatekeepers are gone. In many ways, the guardrails are gone. How do we have intelligent conversations such as those that you host routinely in a media landscape that one could say is deteriorating?
Yeah, again, and this comes back to our earlier conversation. I would disagree with that. I think I listen to a lot of good podcasts. I never listen, obviously, to my own, but I put on a daily show where I hopefully have interesting conversations with very smart people like yourself. So I just don't buy that. And I'm not sure that the mainstream media may have been more reliable in some ways, but I don't buy that cultural pessimism. But let me just go back to something that you touched on. I'm somewhat embarrassed, shamefully, I'm rather ignorant on Foster Wallace. I've never found him a particularly compelling writer. I need to give him more. I need to be more patient with him, I think. And if you're interested, I'm sure I will be too. So I look forward to reading your piece in Liberties and us having a conversation. And Infinite Jest is such a long book. I'm always wary of, what is it, 800-900 pages?
Yes, and then there's the endnotes section, which...
Right. I mean, my thinking, which maybe is
pages.
rather totalitarian or intolerant, is if you can't say it in 300 pages. I mean, Huxley did it in 300. Orwell did it in 300. I'm not sure anyone needs to write 900 pages unless it's War and Peace. But anyway,
Postman said no nonfiction polemics such as those he wrote should run over 300 pages.
Yeah, and Postman is a brilliant writer. I mean, it's not just amusing ourselves to death. I mean, I've read everything
Technopoly.
Technopoly, his stuff on childhood. It's all as contemporary now, almost as when he wrote it. But coming back to the point you made earlier, which I think is an important and interesting one, I think it goes beyond. You talked about everything becoming entertainment. It suggests that there is somehow a serious world and there's an entertainment world, and that this was, I guess, Postman's observation, which he borrowed in some part from McLuhan, was that the serious world is substituted by entertainment. Television in particular, because of course Postman was writing before the existence of the internet. But I think it goes beyond that with Trump. I mean, what particularly interests me about Trump is that there is no serious world. Entertainment is the world. It's the ontological reality. So when you see this Trump presidency, for example, I think the Trump 1.0 a little bit, but Trump 2.0 in particular, is this convergence of, if you like, the serious and the entertainment worlds into one. So when you and we're all, for better or worse, we're being forced almost to watch this Trump narrative. Every day, almost, there's a new story, new climaxes. Every day we go to bed and we wake up the next morning with a new narrative, a new show, new figures, new narratives. So I think what we're seeing with Trump 2.0, and this is an excuse for him, I still think he's an evil man, but evil isn't particularly new. I think what is new is this transformation of politics into entertainment, where everything is reality television. Everything is this kind of plebiscitary entertainment presidency. It'll be interesting to see whether he can get away with it for 4 years. We always assume that people would get bored of it. I mean, the nature of television, of social media, of reality television is that shows go really stale fast and people get bored and move on to the next thing. They didn't do that with him, but I wonder whether it will happen in this second presidency. To me, I mean, everyone still is scratching around to define what Trump means in a broader historical, cultural sense. And for me, it's that convergence of, shall we say, the entertainment industrial complex with American politics.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Fukuyama earlier. He predicted in the end of history that boredom was the lethal pathogen that could spell the end of liberal democracy, or at least endanger it. So, I mean, I guess that's an interesting connection with the entertainment point. And I find that much more convincing than kind of the Marxist view that inequality is the reason people have voted for Trump or have turned against democracy. I guess to wrap things up, I'm issuing a comment. You can reply if you'd like, but to wrap things up here with a final question, well, two things. What can your viewers expect of Keen on America? What kind of guests are you looking forward to featuring? Where do you want to take this conversation? And second, what do you expect of America? Where do you see this going?
Those are big questions, David, rather than good or bad questions. With the first question is easier. I'm going to really develop the show. It's distributed. Some people will be listening to this on RSS, like a traditional podcast, others through Substack. I think that Substack as a platform is really good. It offers authors, creatives, like independent authors and creatives like myself, a platform to distribute their ideas, their video, their audio, their writing, and also enables them to make some money. So I'm going to really develop the Substack side of my business for them over the last, well, really since COVID, when Keen On became a more serious part of my life. I've been putting stuff out for free. I did have a paid Substack membership, but it's not entirely clear what you get. Over the next few months, I'm really going to be developing that. I'm going to be offering paid subscribers much more concrete benefits for handing over some of their money to me. Subscriptions. I'm also interested in people's ideas on what would be valuable. So if you want to email me, if you listen to this, a.keen@me.com. What would you pay for? What is worth it? I'm going to do transcripts. One wonders whether transcripts are really worth it. As I said, I'm writing a book about America. Certainly subscribers will have access to that and my thoughts. Real-time broadcasts. I'm not sure whether those are attractive or not. But I'm going to be experimenting. It's not entirely clear where the value is, but I'm going to be investigating that more aggressively and offering subscribers much more concrete benefits for subscribing to Keen on America. In terms of where America goes, I have no idea. I know where it isn't going. We just did a show with Daniel Besser, who wrote a good piece in Jacobin about why America isn't fascist. America isn't becoming Europe. It's neither becoming Nazi Germany nor social democratic Denmark. America is America. America has its own indigenous traditions, some good, some not so good. And I expect over the next few decades, or certainly years, those traditions to become more obvious. But America isn't becoming Europe in either a good or a bad way. And I think that's the wrong way of looking at things. As I said at the beginning, coming back to where we started, I am still cautiously optimistic about America, but I'm not sure where it's going. It's impossible to know. The reason I'm cautiously optimistic is, and this kind of goes without saying, is America's had crises before, much deeper crises, obviously the Civil War, the 60s, the Great Depression, and it survived and succeeded and prospered. That doesn't mean that it's always going to survive and prosper through any crisis. But I think the energy, the self-creation, the freedom in America is so unique in the world that America will take the world in a really interesting direction. Doesn't mean it will always be a beneficial direction. I mean, we haven't even talked about AI. I don't want to write a book about AI because too many books are being written and it's become predictable and rather boring. But I do think the role of AI in America, particularly given that American companies like OpenAI and Anthropic are pioneering AI, doesn't mean that the Chinese aren't also. So I expect America to dramatically change in an interesting way. I'm cautiously optimistic. As I said, I'm doing a book on that, but there's no guarantee. I can't tell you where it's going. You'll have to stay tuned, David, and I hope everyone listening and watching this will stay tuned, because I hope what I offer on Keen on America is, just as I'm fortunate enough to have a front seat on the America of the 2020s, the show also offers listeners and viewers that front seat too. There are so many interesting things happening, so many interesting people, so many interesting themes, from politics and economics and technology to new drugs, new movements, new religions, that it's not something you want to miss.
Well, neither is Keen on America, if I can say so. I've been a happy guest. I'm a happy guest host, and I'm a happy viewer. So I hope that others watching will join me in continuing to patronize your program. And thank you for allowing me to turn the tables today, ask you a few questions. Wish everybody well.
Well, thanks, David. That was a lot of fun. We'll get you back on the show, both as a guest and as a guest host. Thank you.